I feel the need to start this episode with a content warning because even though a lot of the manga I talk about are obviously very edgy and dark and contain content that may be disturbing for some viewers, this episode I am specifically going to be talking about a lot of manga that use suicide as an aesthetic. A lot of them don't really take it particularly seriously, and I want to comment on them. But in the effort of doing so, I'm going to be displaying a lot of suicide imagery. If this is something that you have a difficult time with, probably don't watch those parts. Point you down to there's a list of time codes in the description. The obvious Suicide Girl manga. Skip that section. Skip the Undead Unluck section. Kagurabachi, it doesn't have suicide themes, but it gets rough. If you're just looking for content warnings in general. So yeah, there are parts of this where I'm going to talk about some very edgy manga. I find myself drawn to manga that use these sort of suicide aesthetics, as I'm calling it. I have been since being suicidal in my early life when I was a kid. I first started ideating suicide at like 8 because I was getting bullied at school, and came to sort of view media that showed that kind of imagery. Like Persona 3 would be a great example of a game where there's constantly imagery of characters putting guns to their head, pulling the trigger, but instead of killing themselves, they're releasing their powers. And so it's like taking the imagery or the thought or the idea, the satisfaction of something that maybe I was fantasizing about, and taking that and instead empowering yourself through it. That's something that has helped me. I know it's not going to read the same way for everybody, especially depending on the media, the way it treats everything. It's just going to hit different for everybody. So I'm going to tell you about how this stuff hit with me as I get into it. This first manga that I have on screen here does not deal with suicide. This is actually just like a neat little like 9-page collection of cool images with a story about trying to turn into an airplane, I guess. It doesn't seem to have worked in the end. I just thought that looked really cool. You've now read that manga. Congratulations. You should actually probably take your time with it. Man-Made Angel is the name of that one. But we'll go ahead and start with Undead Unluck. I've been curious about the manga that are still running in Shonen Jump. They've canceled or have ended so many of their long-running manga, and some of them like moved to other platforms or magazines or whatever. So there's only like 3 or 4 long runners that are still in there, with One Piece being substantially longer running than any of the other ones that are still there. So Undead Unluck, even though it's only a few years old, is already now one of the like 6 or 7 oldest manga that runs in Shonen Jump. And given that it's got 200 chapters, this is one of those where I would have to feel pretty strongly about it to want to read that much of it. And I don't, and I didn't think I would. I mean, I'd seen what the anime adaptation looked like. The character design, this guy, I immediately look at him and I think, okay, this is like Kamina style, like loud, abrasive, badass guy, like the dude from Needless. Like this was a style of protagonist that was kind of popular in like the late 2000s, maybe even the early 2000s. Like, hot-blooded. Usually this kind of guy would be piloting a mech, but instead he's like a zombie. And I think his powers are really cool. The fact that he uses like regeneration as a way of doing all kinds of like fun tricks, the violence of this manga I think is strong. The artwork is also really strong. Like it's got this confidence to it. It's got, the very clear line work, very well defined expressions, which reminds me of Shaman King. Both of them, they feel like you're looking at like graphic art. Like every single image could be a tattoo or a graffiti or something, um, and like I didn't dislike this first chapter. I understand why a lot of people would. A substantial amount of it is about. So basically, this guy wants to die. He is attempting suicide constantly, but he's quite convinced because he's been alive for like, I want to say like over 100 years. He's been alive for a long time. He's been trying to die for a long time. So he's very convinced that it's just not going to happen. However, this girl has some kind of unluck curse where if you make contact with her skin, then based on how much and how intense of contact, something very bad will happen to you, probably. So he's trying to kill himself by way of molesting her, essentially. And she is simultaneously trying to escape. This is like a very, like a Pepe Le Pew chasing the fucking cat in the old cartoons kind of situation, but like accelerated to shonen action levels. But like, she wants someone to touch her. She wants love. She doesn't think she's ever going to get it because nobody can touch her except for this guy. And it's a guy she doesn't want to be touched by because he's insane and he's awful and he's abrasive. And I don't know. I think this is a style of storytelling that it's almost designed around uncomfort. Like, I don't think this manga is in any way trying to say that this is like a healthy relationship. The point of this is to portray an unhealthy relationship, to portray something toxic that maybe over time becomes less toxic. But it starts from this place because it is assuming basically that the reader is operating on this level of like suppression, like suppressing instincts at this level, if that makes sense. Like, it's assuming that the reader relates to one of these characters of either feeling like I am unlovable or feeling like I am desperate to die, I guess would be the other one. Or desperate for like it forms a metaphor in a sense. Like, he's literally molesting her, so it seems like it's lust, but operating within the confines of the story, he's not really doing it because he is sexually interested in her. He's just trying to die, So it creates this paradigm that, feels like it's there to kind of justify the fan service, but at the same time, I don't think it's trying to make a moral argument for itself. It's supposed to be edgy, like the point of this manga is to be like ridiculously edgy while still appealing to a young audience, still being like the main character is still kind of a hero. He's still fighting bad guys. He still has like, he's not trying to commit evil aside from the evil he's committing on this girl in the effort of trying to kill himself, which she doesn't want any part of it. She does not want to have to be a part of this relationship, but I assume that eventually they will come to need each other and everything. So yeah, I don't know, some people will be really uncomfortable reading something that's like about a toxic relationship that like these characters, well, this character, the guy, is unforgivable, but I'm sure that the point of this manga is that he's cool. So that doesn't bother me only because I, as a person, can filter out, like, I don't have to think that this guy and all of his actions are cool in order to enjoy watching him do, all the crazy stuff he's going to do. However, I got to chapter 2 of this, and it pretty quickly felt like it was losing steam and getting repetitive, and it didn't really set up for, like, a big overarching plot. There's a lot of manga, a lot of them, especially Shonen Jump manga, that to me feel like a very well thought out one shot, where like the first chapter establishes all the ideas perfectly and is eventful page to page, and then you get to the second chapter and it just kind of repeats most of what was said in the first chapter, and then there's just like this, you know, rapid diminishing return of how much content, like how much new shit is actually going on in each chapter. And yeah, so this one, like, again, knowing it's 195 chapters, that's a lot of chapters. That's you know, that's quite a few volumes, actually. It's probably like 20 volumes. This premise does not make me think I need to read 20 volumes of that. No. But there's another shonen manga that is newer. At this point, it's like probably one of the older ones in the magazine at 21 chapters, but it's newer and it's incredibly popular. I am talking about Kagurabachi. And this is one that the first time I even saw the name of this manga was like an article coming up in my fucking email from some website that's like, Kagurabachi, instantly the new Demon Slayer Jujutsu Kaisen. This is the biggest manga of all time. Right off the bat. And I was just like, Jesus Christ. Okay, well, I guess I'll have to check that out at some point. And now I've read all of it, and it's really good. It's really fun. It's really entertaining. It's got its own distinct energy and personality. It's got really solid art. It feels really modern. It's very violent, and it's all about swords. This is the most sword-ass manga you are ever gonna get. It's you know, heroes versus yakuza in a really absurd universe. The way this manga is written is just really solid. Like the structure of it, I'm not gonna say it's perfect. I have some qualms with the writing that I'll bring up in a minute, but the overall feeling of like knowing what you're doing as a storyteller comes through in this manga in a way that it doesn't with Jujutsu Kaisen or with Demon Slayer or with Chainsaw Man even. And Chainsaw Man, I'll give more credit that I think Chainsaw Man I think Fujimoto like nailed down the broad ideas pretty quickly, and that manga is always exciting to read. But I do think it's like it's very weird. It's very much like changing gears all the time into all these different ideas of what's cool and what will be fun. And it always works because Fujimoto is just a genius. But this manga is like tight. Like it feels thought out and constructed, and it has wasted shockingly little time in 21 chapters for being a Shonen Jump manga, where typically, I mean, I mentioned on the first episode I've been reading Shaman King, and it's been very slow that I've been reading it because it just takes its time. And it's not that like story events don't happen quickly, it's that in a chapter, like one thing will happen and a ton of build up and like description towards that thing, you know, like the characters will remind you what happened in the last chapter, and then they'll start talking about what's about to happen, and then they'll talk about what's happening as it's happening, and then they'll remind you what just happened after it happened, and that's a chapter. Kagurabachi is not like that. If anything, it skips over information and then fills you back in later when it thinks you want to know that. But it is really good at raising questions at interesting moments. So, for instance, something that I touched on in the first episode, hopefully you went and read Astro Baby after I told you that it was really good and you needed to go read it, because I'm about to spoil the first chapter of Astro Baby, but the mom dies. And so I've got this video, I'm hyping it up. It's probably not going to come out until like fucking mid-April based on the scheduling I've been doing of when my videos are coming out. It's called Dead Parents and Cannibals, and the concept is that all of the biggest hit shows all of the biggest hit manga, everything that's been super hype in culture lately, has had dead, like one of the parents getting killed in a horrific way towards the start of the story, and also cannibals, but usually not human. Like they're humanoid, but they're not human. So some stories like start off with dead moms and then go into cannibals, like Promised Neverland. But like most of the hits, start off with a parent dying. Obviously, Demon Slayer, Jujutsu Kaisen, fucking Attack on Titan, Full Metal Alchemist, and then at some point they have to fight humanoid cannibals. So this manga, as I was reading the first chapter, it's 55 pages, and a substantial amount of the early part is dedicated to the main character's dad. You learn more about his dad than you do about him. It's like in-depth on his dad. And so I want to say like 6 or 7 pages into this, I'm like, this dad has to die by the end of this chapter. Like we're getting so front loaded with dad right now, and that just doesn't happen unless the character's going to die. But like in the case with Astro Baby, it feels like the death of this father is the point of the manga. It's not just the catalyst that starts events in motion, which in Attack on Titan, it comes around back in a weird way at the end of the manga that sucks, but mostly like the death of the mom had just been the catalyst for why the rest of the story happens. It's in the case of Fullmetal Alchemist, like we learn a little bit more about their mom later, but it's kind of deliberately kept like from the perspective of the kids, so that we always understand her from their perspective, and we only ever learn a little bit about her from the perspective of their dad when we see the backstory. But like, it's not the point of Fullmetal Alchemist. It's not about their mom or her values or whatever. It's about Ed and his values and his father's values. This is about this kid grew up with his dad being the greatest sword maker of all time, who literally ended a war with his swords. Which, when you're reading this early part of the chapter and they tell you that, you're thinking like, well, when does this take place? Like, is this at the end of the 1800s? Everybody looks like they're dressed very modern. It looks like they have a modern house. They speak in modern dialect. What was the war that was ended with these swords? Because they don't tell you very much about the swords. It's focused on the relationship with the dad, the fact that he's the sword maker, but what the ethos is behind him making the swords. So then, when you're expecting, of course, the dad is going to die, we skip 38 months later to a totally different thing going on with these mobsters. We just introduced the villains. And then we reintroduce the main character, grown up, scar on his face, like, what is going on? Obviously the dad died, but that wasn't the drama. That wasn't like a satisfying climax of the thing that makes you tear jerk. You knew it was going to happen. It has obviously happened, but it's not glorified or dramatized. And this is a really interesting take, and there's a lot of stuff like this in this manga where it will show you some really crazy violence, especially from the main character. It will show you the main character murdering swaths of bad guys, but it will cut away from showing you good guys dying, or cut away from showing the bad guys winning, because it doesn't want to glorify it. And it's really fascinating the way this manga is. It kind of suggests that like violence is only cool when it's being done for justice, but it's so cool when it's being done for justice. And like, it's a great series of reveals, because the cut forward in time, to the gangsters, teaches us about wizards. Turns out in this world, in addition to people having swords, there's wizards who do weird, crazy shit like grow a tree out of the ground that'll stab you in the face, right? And this is like, it just seems like pretty regular magic type shit. He does like a teleportation. Okay, cool, right? Whatever. Wizards. As it, continues along and you start realizing this is not Japan. This is like a modern, I mean, it is Japan, but it's a different, it's got magic, it's got wizards, it's got gangs that literally like run the towns. The swords that his dad built are not just regular ass katanas. They're super fucking like, it infused with bullshit souls and stuff katanas that can do crazy stuff. But yeah, every scene, the main character just rips through like fucking. Hold on, I think there's a scene in here where he cuts through. Yeah, there we go. Look at this. And I mean, this is essentially Kenshin Himura did all of this in Rurouni Kenshin. There's definitely a vibe of like copying that style of movement, but it's so much more raw here. Like, I mean, I could shit on Rurouni Kenshin's author for 100 reasons, but I just, even though I grew up a fan of Rurouni Kenshin, even without all the pedophile stuff, I still think the manga is actually just not that good. I think it's very by the numbers. It feels like he was interested in the historical context and did a great job of like fleshing out the time period, and that's what makes the manga memorable and successful. Is that it's like a a fun shonen thing set in that time period, but like it feels like it was written by editors. It feels like every aspect of it is just like lifeless and robotic. Like I don't know. I don't like his artwork. This manga is like the promise of Kenshin if it was like actually cool. Like if the artwork looked sick, if the characters were even more heroic and deep, and it wasn't just the whole pacifism, basic bitch plot line that's been done in a bunch of other stories. Nah, this guy's cutting through swaths of people because they're fucking evil, and it's really badass. So as it goes along, it starts introducing, there's this cute little girl. I don't know if she's just was just meant to be there for one arc, and if she's not going to be around anymore. It's hard to tell because she hasn't really been around for the next arc that we're kind of jumping into now. But basically she can regenerate her body, so people keep like cutting fucking parts off of her just like in experiments and like eating it. Just cannibals. Turns out cannibals. Hey, cannibals. They made it in. Yeah, it's pretty fucked up because like the character is introduced as like just cute little lovable. Hey, I'm the little cute kid. Hey, I'm hanging out, and then it's like she's getting her legs continually cut off, and it, like we see it, like we see her like bawling her eyes out as her fucking legs regrow over and over again. It's pretty gruesome. I'm starting to get the impression that the meta right now in manga is like child violence. Like, because of the fact that we can't do sexual violence anymore. I talk about this as well in my Dead Parents and Cannibals script, that like the go-to for like what's the worst thing you can do to somebody was always sexual violence. But that became, I think, too uncomfortable for most people, whereas cannibals are like in just the right sweet spot of like nobody wants to get eaten, but like it's not as hard to understand because we can imagine a context in which you would eat other people if you were like desperate and they died right in front, something that's actually happened in real life, and we all kind of look at it and go like, wow, that's really awful. I wouldn't want to have done that, So I think that's why cannibalism hits as like something that's edgy but relatable and understandable in a way that sexual violence is too much, but in order to like, I also think we live in a world where there is so little moral righteousness on the part of anyone adult that like it's very difficult to write a sympathetic character who's not a teenager or younger. And when you've got your teenage protagonist like in this manga, is already like a mass murderer. Um, how are you, like, who are you meant to be sympathetic for when they're getting tortured other than like a cute little girl? So I understand how we got here. Made in Abyss definitely is the cause. uh I'm not saying it's the first. I'm just saying it got really popular, and now this is where we're at. Promised Neverland, obviously, but that was more threats of child violence than it was like actively showing it the way this manga does. So that's your content warning. But I really enjoy Kagurabachi. It feels the most like Chainsaw Man of anything out there. Like I compared it to Rurouni Kenshin, but it's very clearly inspired by Chainsaw Man. It's got that same sense of like cinematic fight scenes. It skips over a lot of details, like I've said, and kind of goes back. It's got a lot of that visual and pacing style taken from Chainsaw Man, but it doesn't have nearly as many story beats as taken from that as like Jujutsu Kaisen does, where that manga felt, up until a point where it really started like, doing its own thing. Initially, just the premise of it was so similar to Chainsaw Man that it was like, well, how can you even, but I do think each of these manga has its own identity. They're each about something different. They're thematically built different. And it's hard for me to say if I like Kagurabachi as much as Chainsaw Man, but that's also partly because that manga has had, I haven't even read the Chainsaw Man 2, the whole second part of it that's been going for a while now, but there were 20 volumes of Chainsaw Man, so I had a lot of time to be fully endeared to that story. And even just the stuff that was covered in season 1 of the anime, like experiencing that in the manga and in the anime was not enough to make it like a favorite. It was enough for me to like, yeah, this is solid, this is fun, this is cool, but it was reading all of Chainsaw Man that made it like, wow, this is one of the best manga I've ever read. Kagurabachi could get there. I think it had a stronger start. I think the first 21 chapters of this are better written, if maybe not as memorable as Chainsaw Man, just because it doesn't have that wild imaginative spark that makes that manga so fucking memorable. It's just really good. It's it's just like a fun, brisk read. It's very easy to read. It's very easy to be invested in while you're reading it, although it's starting to get into some crazy big shonen battles and introducing all these organizations and characters, so it'll remain to be seen if it can stay good, but so far everything it's done I've enjoyed. So I've only gotten like 3 or 4 chapters so far into Suicide Girl, but this is the most like obviously my aesthetic manga I've read in a while. It's one of those where I know if I had seen this on the shelf at Barnes and Noble, I would have purchased it immediately and probably kept collecting it, whether I ended up reading all the volumes or not, because I'm very known to buy manga and not end up reading it. But this is Suicide Girl, a manga I wish I had written. This is like the kind of thing I'm just like, how did somebody else beat me to this? But I could never draw. I can't draw this good, and but the art is perfect for what it is. This is a very dark comedy action series about a girl who really, really, really wants to commit suicide. She's really more dedicated than Undead Unluck guy. That guy is more so desperate, I think. But, he's at the end. He's been doing it for a long time, so he's kind of more adjusted to the idea that he can't die. This girl just got this power. It's actually shocking how similar the plot of this is to Undead Unluck, but it's a lot more focused, because this one doesn't have all the sexual stuff. It's just about this girl wants to kill herself. She can't. And moreover, her mission is to prevent other people from doing so. So this gets off to one of the weirdest starts I've ever seen of a manga. But it starts off there's this suicide cult has gathered at the Suicide Cafe, where supposedly you can kill yourself. And there's three people who are clearly like at wit's end, ready to die. They all have like all of their circumstances are so like obvious and commonplace that it feels like parody right off the bat. Like you immediately have this feeling of, okay, the author is kind of mocking these people for why they want to kill themselves, even though you know these are real reasons people do it. So that's why I think this manga is definitely going to read as massively insensitive to a lot of people. This manga is very much making fun of suicide. That's the whole concept of this manga, is making fun of suicide, presenting it as something so obvious, so like sought after, so cherished, by its main character, that it needs to be like taken down a peg. I know some of you will inherently just understand what's appealing about this, and some of you really won't. Like, my brother Victor writes movies that are like this all the time, so I know this would resonate with him. But like, so at the Suicide Cafe, it turns out that this old man is actually just using like these smelling salts to make people recover and not kill themselves, which just makes this girl really upset because she very sincerely wanted to die, and those people all were just sad about whatever was going on in their lives. So he curses her with the inability to die unless she can prevent someone else's suicide. She has to trade someone else's life being saved for her life being ended. And so she tries to prevent a suicide, and she thinks she's done it because she's resolved the emotional conflict. She literally just like does therapy to this girl. The whole scene is it's really great. It's like, it's played so like it has the sincerity of understanding like what what a person might be going through that would be leading them to this point, and like doing a good job of funnily convincing her not to die. And there's a moment, it's not yet, I guess maybe it's after she rectifies the situation later, where like it shows the girl like go to her mom at the car, and like she like slaps her in the face, and this is like their happy resolution. It's really funny. But turns out girl dies anyways, because this was not the emotional problems are not why people kill themselves. So this is where this manga starts getting really interesting, and it's also trying to redeem suicide victims. Like, on top of being like sort of mocking the real reasons that people emotionally do it, it also wants to sort of absolve them of that by insisting that actually all suicide is caused by monsters. There's these like ghost demons that haunt people and drive them to suicide, and so her real mission is to become a magical girl who can kill the ghost monsters and save the people. I'm hovering on this page because this is just the coolest fucking page I've ever seen. I want a poster of this. I kind of, honestly, if I was going to get a tattoo, I think I would get this Suicide Girl page, because this is fucking badass. It's so cool. And yeah, like the horror faces are really good too. Like, they're very clearly taking influence from like Junji Ito and horror manga, but it's, I guess you would call this a horror comedy, but it doesn't really lean into the horror angle nearly as much as, presenting it for laughs, especially just because the character is such an over-the-top, ridiculous, pumped up ADHD. But God, the artwork is so fucking cool all the time. I love the eyes. So yeah, in the second chapter, she goes on to, save the girl from the first chapter. She uses her noose to turn into a magical girl who is themed around hanging yourself. This manga will probably get banned in some countries. This manga will probably get this video like marked as adults only or something, but I really like it. I think I've like caught up to myself almost. I've read like 3 chapters, but it's fun. I like it a lot. Only read this if you're sick and demented and you think the art looks cool. This manga is also pretty edgy and violent. I forgot to mention this in my list of edgy violent stuff at the start. So if you clicked over to this is also edgy and violent, though it doesn't deal with suicide themes specifically. But this is Psycho Party. I clicked over to this because of its name, and it's pretty cool, although it hasn't really gotten super memorable yet. Like, as I'm scrolling through it and remembering what this story is about, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember reading this. But like, it's got this feeling of, I don't know if this author is like new. I haven't read any of their stuff before that I know of, but it definitely feels it feels like the pacing isn't fully realized. Like, I think the story is well planned out. I just think that it kind of plods along, and it doesn't feel like it's gotten to a point where something, where it convinces me that it's going to have like a really huge emotional high at some point. But it's entertaining and generally good, and I think the character writing is solid. Basically, the idea of this manga is that there are psychics. It's sort of an X-Men situation. Every psychic has their own powers, but society distrusts them because at some point, like 7 years ago, a psychic did a mass broadcast to make a ton of people kill themselves. And so people are afraid of psychics. There's essentially this, like, the first chapter is basically about the main girl who she goes to the psychic school. She gets bullied there all the time. She's just like a timid, frightful, very polite little girl who, as she's leaving the school, we can see that like it's all covered in graffiti because everybody hates the psychics and stuff. And so she immediately meets this girl who befriends her, and as they're communicating, you as a reader can slowly start to feel that maybe she's trying to manipulate her, maybe it isn't really trying to be friends. Then of course she reveals that she's part of like the KKK for psychics, and they're gonna kill her ass. But then her brother, who she hasn't seen in a long time, shows up because of the fact that her psychic powers become activated, and turns out she's like Alucard or something. She grows crazy Helsing powers out of herself, which this imagery I think is really cool. There's a few, I mentioned Helsing because that moment, and there's a couple other images in this that have reminded me of Helsing. The story doesn't really remind me of it in any way, but just some of the imagery makes me feel like that might have been an influence. But yeah, basically because she is revealed to be one of the really powerful psychics, now she gets to be taken in by the government, who had already taken in her older brother, to be a part of their super psychics program and, go stop bad guys. I honestly can barely remember what happens in the like next 5 chapters after this, like, because they go to the academy. There's a lot of like just introducing the other characters, the other psychics that they're gonna hang out with, introducing the plot. Her brother's like a weird siscon, like he's clearly in love with her, and she's like uncomfortable about it because at first she's really happy that he's back in her life, but then it's kind of like, but he's kind of creepy. So like basically the main theme of this manga is distrust, or like, realizing that you're being manipulated. And like, because the main girl is like, she's so easy to manipulate, she's such a, she's trying so hard to be nice, trying so hard to be quiet and good and just do whatever she's told, that it's very easy to, convince her of things. But also she's so sincere that it kind of wins people over. And so like that first chapter, at the end of it, the KKK girl, the main girl tells her like, I'm gonna consider you a friend even though you fucked me over and all that. And so there's a sense, this girl, as she's watching the main character from a distance, you get the sense that it's going to start changing her perspective, start making her think, well, maybe I'm on the wrong side and I'm going to team up, and so, you know, friendship will win out. That's kind of where the story seems to be going, but it's doing a lot of build up right now. So that's why I said the pacing feels a little odd, but the artwork is strong. The powers are pretty cool when they're actually used. This is just like a little insert chapter where they have a bathtub, I guess. But yeah, it's only 7 chapters, so it remains to be seen whether this will be dope or if it'll just go to shit. Here's another manga that I am dropping after a few chapters, even though I liked the premise. It just doesn't go anywhere. It goes nowhere fast. I'm surprised that this manga has 66 chapters, because even though I do think it gets off to a strong start, it feels like it grinds to a halt almost immediately. And I skipped further into the manga to see like what it looks like currently, and it seemed like the artwork had gotten really lazy and just, I don't know. I don't know if the passion is there for this still, but you know, let me know if I'm wrong if you're a fan of Kindergarten Wars. But the concept of this is that there's a kindergarten where the children of like all these noble people, you know, anybody with money, their kids go to this school, which is protected by a bunch of former assassins who, you know, are basically on Suicide Squad rules. Like, you know, they'll have their sentence reduced or taken away if they can protect these kids for a year. But it's a stupid, goofy, preposterous premise. The point of it is for this action comedy about this girl who is the ultimate, most badass assassin, and other assassins keep showing up at the school, and she stops them, but they keep turning out to be hot guys. And this woman is incredibly down bad because she's A, an assassin, B, a prisoner, and C, a elementary school teacher. So she keeps meeting these handsome dudes who want to kill her, immediately falling in love with them, and then trying to figure out if she has compatibility. So she's, you know, asking him some questions like, hey, you know, I know you're a really bad guy, but, you know, and each guy catches on. They're like, oh shit, this girl's into me. Maybe I can convince her to let me go. And then she asks him a question. He gives the wrong answer, and she brains his ass, which I thought was hilarious when I read it in the first chapter. The second chapter, the exact same thing happens. Like, just a different guy shows up. They have, you know, a different conversation, but it's the same joke. You know, it by chapter 3, it introduces like another one of the teachers, and they kind of have some interactions, but I don't know, it all felt very generic, very just anime comedy du jour. It's like working if it was about assassins, and I couldn't shake this feeling like this is what Spy Family has done specifically to manga. I read another one like this too. There's a few manga that are basically just Spy Family but with a few steps removed, which doesn't work. Because Spy Family only works because it's so complicated that it's like you got an assassin and a spy and a psychic, and they all have different motives, and it's, you know, this really complicated interplay, and that's what makes it good spy fiction, because at its core, it's spy fiction. This manga is just a really silly action comedy that the premise just doesn't have legs. And it's, again, this first chapter is good enough that I understand how this could be continued. But seriously, look at this art. And then skipping to chapter 66, which is the most recent chapter, like, there's some stuff that looks okay, but just, what is, like, this? It looks unfinished. I don't know what state this author is in. Maybe they're not doing well or something. You know, maybe it's like a Togashi situation, but I don't know. This I mean, it looks like it's gotten edgy. It looks like this seems more serious. This doesn't seem like as much of a comedy. But I don't know. It doesn't really look good. So yeah, that's a drop. All right, here's the best manga I'm going to talk about on this episode, and I'm going to try to spoil as little of this as possible. You should really just go read it. Anybody, everybody, go read it, you know. If you skipped over everything else in the episode because it was too edgy and dark, this is your manga recommendation for this episode. This is Tabi. This is written by Irie Aki, whom I had not read any of their manga. It's the same author as Ran in the Grey World, which I have seen in stores and thought looked cool, but never ended up buying. And I've heard good things about it, but I will definitely read that manga after having read Tabi. This is a short story collection. It's 13 chapters. The first one's 28 pages. The last one's like 66. I think there's another one that's like 20-something pages, but everything in between is like 13 or less. It's very short stories, and they are all brilliant. Every single one I read through, and at the end of it, I felt like, wow, that was satisfying. You know, like that was like eating a nice, like a... It's like fine dining, you know? It's very small portions, but it's so unique and so flavorful that you're like, wow, I fucking never could have gotten that anywhere else, and it was great at that. So, that was the way I felt reading this. Like, for me, this kind of helped me to appreciate what do I consider to be a masterpiece? And, like, for instance, when I read Soloist in a Cage, I came away giving that like a 9 out of 10. And I'm trying to phase out using scores because I don't think they're that helpful. But just for example, in this, like, what separates that from being a masterpiece in my mind? And it's mostly, I think, that the concept, while I really enjoyed it, all of it felt like something that somebody else could have made. Like, given enough time, enough effort, and wanting, just, you know, having wanted to make that thing. Like, nobody else would have, but somebody else maybe could have. Wouldn't have, it probably turned out the same way, you know, but when I read this manga, it left me with a feeling of, like, this first chapter is the most generic of them. This one is about this beautiful swordswoman traveling who is just like a total hard ass. Like her brother is out to kill her, so she's like really guarded. And there's this weird looking dude who just kind of always happens to be around her. And like it's obvious that the point of this chapter is to create a sense of discomfort and unease of like, could this man be the assassin? What is he doing? He doesn't really seem to be doing anything. He just seems to be kind of a strange guy. And then eventually it turns out not only is he not doing anything bad, he's actually trying to help her. He ends up, relieving her spirit in a moment, and so she thanks him. And it's like, hey, turns out you were the coolest guy of all. This felt to me like it was the pilot chapter of a manga that I was going to read about this woman, because like it establishes her as a character so well that it probably I would have the same criticism of it that I would have had of a lot of those other manga had it continued, where it would have been like, well, that was such a good pilot, but you know, what are you gonna, like, how do you turn that into an ongoing story without substantially changing it, or, you know, coming up with a whole new idea that ties into that universe? Instead, the story just ends there, and there's a new story in the next chapter, and it's equally good, with an equally interesting little twist climax, if not more so, because most of them are, again, less generic than this one. And the last one is like an epic version of like a concept like this. But man, any of these could be like an anime OVA that would be considered a classic. I think they're all just really good, and the artwork is stunning. But this what I was sort of getting at with the Soloist and the Cage comparison. Like, this makes me feel like I could never do this. Like, there's no way I would have had all of these ideas or done them anything like the way they're done here. It just feels so particular to this artist and their worldview. But that worldview is also so broad and rich and full of understanding that the stories end up being ridiculously good, especially Toki's Journey, the last one. It's about these two traveling up this mountain. I don't want to reveal anything past the beginning. They're really good. Just read them. I don't want to spoil anything. Go read Tabi. It's a 10 out of 10. It's a masterwork. It's inimitable and incomparable, except to other things that are incredibly good, by way of the fact that they're incredibly good. They're all in the same category of being very good together. Masterpiece. That's pretty much it. That's all the new manga that I'm going to talk about. There were new chapters of Genkaku Shijuu Soudan since the last one, which, you know, continues to be what it is. This one had swimsuits, which is kind of funny because the character art is so, like, non-sexualized that seeing them in swimsuits, you know, posing is really funny. And then you got Spider-Man Octopus Girl, which is setting up for its next arc, continuing, like, basically, the main character girl had this friend who's like her childhood friend who's been a bitch lately, and so the main point of this manga is going to be to try to, like, make things up with her, I think. So we finally learned her backstory, and yeah, I've said before, I think this manga will probably conclude before too long. But I'm recording this before the release of episode 1 of Manga Monday, so I haven't had time to get around to anything anybody recommended me or anything you commented in the comments. You know, I'll find out next time. If you don't know already, Anime with Personality, the second of my 24 anime analysis videos that release bi-weekly on the We Watch Anime channel that you're watching right now, is available already to my backers on Back.buy, Substack, and Patreon. So you could have already watched it before it releases on this Thursday, I think. You look at the calendar. You make sense of it. I'm recording these too far ahead of time for me to make sense of what Thursday is what. The next video, I think, is going to be Jujutsu Kaisen's Turning Point. So tune in for that. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Manga forever.